Alex, thank you very much for those very kind remarks, and Gary's introductory comments where he's outlining the protocols of this building. I've been a Member of Parliament now for 18 years, and I must say I'm pleased to hear that we have a protocol that says that you shouldn't approach us without an appointment. I'm just wondering when that will ever be honoured. So it is part of this place that people do talk, and they talk at the most inconvenient of times and the most irregular of circumstances. There's facilities just across the corridor here, and this is a site of where we do a lot of our estimates work, and I assure you that people have approached me in those facilities without an appointment and given me most extraordinary information during estimates periods. And that was when we were in opposition, of course. In government, people aren't quite so forthcoming. I'm particularly pleased that to be able to be here with you today, and so for the Excellency, the Ambassador for Germany, it's a great pleasure to be able to see you here today and to see so many people who are engaged with us in the quest for new knowledge. Because the truth of the matter is that science, by definition, is a global business. And we are partners, some would say, even rivals, in the quest for knowledge. And for our part, we welcome that global quest because, put simply, we believe in the transformative power of science. We are in the change business. If we aspire to a better world, then we know that we're going to actually have to do something to achieve it. And it is my view that science and research plays a critical role in that quest. As far as I'm concerned, the internationalisation of our research system is, of course, a key part of the successes that we have enjoyed. Australia's got a right to be proud of the fact that we, with 0.3% or 0.03% of the world's population, produce something like 3% of the world's papers. Germany produces 8%, a substantially larger population. But by size, I think we can say legitimately that this is a country that has something to say, and we ought to be proud of what's said. We produce extraordinary science in this country because of our ability to work collaboratively. We work collaboratively with about 150 countries. Now, the figures that I'm given tell me that in 2009, Australians co-authored more than 26,000 papers with international partners. So, for us, while we produce 3% of the world's papers, that still means, and some equate that with the world's knowledge, I think that's a pretty simplistic analysis, but nonetheless, the equations are pretty straightforward. If there's 3% of the papers coming out of this country, it means there's 97% of the papers somewhere else. And we want to be part of that. We want Australians to work with the world's best, and we want to measure ourselves against that very high standard. I can say to you that's one of the reasons why, when I first became Minister, I was pleased to open up the Australian Research Council's fellowships to international candidates. And that's why this government has been so proud to support infrastructure investments like the GMT, or EMBL, or the SKA, the Square Kilometre Array. That's why next month I'll be visiting CERN. That's why next month I will be visiting Berlin and a number of other places in Europe, because we want to promote the project, the SKA, but we want to also promote international science. Now, CSIRO is a very active ambassador for Australia. not just in this forum, but in many, many other forums. And we're able to build the partnerships, I think, through the 7th Framework in ICT research, as well as a number of others. I think Australians, perhaps more than many other people in the world, appreciate the value of ICT projects. And as a country with extraordinarily high ambitions, we have a very proud history in that field. We run cattle stations which are bigger than Belgium. We build mines in most remote places of extraordinary size. We build research stations in the Antarctic. We are prepared to build the SKA in the middle of a desert. And because we face up to those extraordinary challenges that were once known as the sort of tyranny of distance, we know the value of and the importance of communications. Communications technology has, in the past, transformed our nation. You see, for instance, the history that arose around the development of the telegraph. Just the way in which this country was opened up. You think about what we are doing with the National Broadband Network, where we're seeking to actually provide fibre to the nodes support for 93% of Australian premises, to provide them with broadband speeds of up to 100 megabits per second. And in a country of our size, that's truly a remarkable objective. Of course, the other 7% will provide support through next generation wireless satellite technology at speeds that should be considerably improved on what people have it today. We can deliver these projects. I'm very confident we can do it. Very much because we have a desire to invest in the pursuit of excellence in research. There is a direct link between our capacities in research and innovation and the productivity and the welfare and the living standards of our people. So we take the view that we shouldn't be dominated by our geography. We know that we can benefit from the ingenuity, the creativity of our scientists in overcoming those difficulties. And that's what we've seen with, for instance, the Wi-Fi technology that CSIRO developed, which of course is now spread globally. And it's because the CSIRO is at the forefront of ICT innovation, we're able to look with confidence to the future. I trust that the advanced capabilities that CSIRO is developing is able to be replicated across the rest of our research system. And I know that with the recent reduction, the production of ERA, Excellence in Research for Australia, the report there showed that when it came to ICT, 91% of Australian institutions that were assessed were above or at world standards. That's a very, very high bar. And it demonstrates, not on the basis of hunch, not on the basis of rumour, not on the basis of speculation, but on the basis of the evidence, hard empirical evidence of the quality of the work that's done in this country. Now, I'm proud to be part of a government that is actually determined to push through these initiatives. I'm determined to help businesses, both here and abroad, tap into that great Australian talent pool and to build on that pool in terms of collaboration with the rest of the world. That's why we're introducing the biggest reform in business innovation in a generation, our new R&D tax credit. Now, I'm one vote short at the moment in the Senate, but it's only a matter of time before we are successful. The credit replaces our existing tax concession with a much more generous, a much more flexible and a much more accessible incentive arrangement. It distributes support from the top end of town, the very large business in the country, and it provides more support to the vast bulk of our small and medium-sized enterprises, people who I think were more likely to be responsive to financial incentives when it comes to investing in their own futures. And small and medium-sized businesses who engage in genuine R&D will be the major beneficiaries of that arrangement. We'll be able to strengthen the incentive in terms of our international partners by removing existing arrangements in regard to IP rights and ensure that what we call the beneficial ownership test is actually removed. So we actually want to build on those international collaborations in the private sector as well as in the public sector. Now let me just offer this an example of international research partnerships. Last October, Prime Minister and I opened the new IBM Global Research and Development Laboratories at the University of Melbourne. That's a new centre, 150 researchers, 38 PhD students will be developing new ICT solutions in the fields from health to climate change to energy and food security. Now, speaking at the launch, the then General Manager of IBM Australia, Glenn Boreham, just pointed out that IBM invests more in R&D than any similar country in their field. They invest something like about $6 billion per annum. And what Mr. Boreham said was that IBM had learnt to spread those investment dollars across the planet, where we believe there are the best skills, he said, opportunities and local support. Now, IBM found them in Australia. And I can assure you that our commitment to the excellence in ICT collaborations just will not waver. Because in the end, we are committed to building a fairer, a richer and a greener Australia. And international collaboration in science and research has an absolutely pivotal role to play in developing that agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. I think we've got time for a couple of questions. So, when you ask the question, could I ask you to identify yourself and who you are and where you're from? So, question here from the front.
Michael Zammit from Energy Response. We're a demand management company out of Melbourne in Australia and New Zealand. Senator Carr, I attended a conference in Washington DC recently, and a congressman got up and made a speech, and it was around smart grid and the technologies for smart grid that were going to be required. Rather than your attack that takes pursuit of excellence is really the heart of what you're saying, theirs was that they were going to try and beat China. Is there a fear that we're going to be left behind in the wake of China, or is this just, vaporware?
Well, let me just discuss the United States for a moment. The United States has for some time engaged in an internal debate about the future of science and innovation. There was a report rising above the gathering storm. What's that, 5-6 years ago now? It was shelved. So there was an identification of the problem, but no action. Their political system essentially has become so gridlocked that they're not often able to reach conclusions to identifiable problems. The fact is that that report demonstrated that the United States was slipping behind in the race in terms for moving up the value chain. And there was a group of people, I think, in the political system there that understood that the United States had to change the approach that was taken. There was a dominant view established in the economic faculties, led by the Chicago School, that argued essentially that the way to, in the globalised world, to produce benefits was to actually go down the value chain. And that's been demonstrably proved to be incorrect. You've seen countries around the world. The United States, of course, remains the largest economy, second only to China. And the debate is how long will it be before China's GDP actually exceeds the United States. But you've seen countries around the world that once had a broad, diversified economy, particularly in advanced manufacturing, are no longer able to do it. So there was a narrowing of the economic basis of many of the countries that were once great powers. Think of England. And over-concentration on particular sections of the services, for instance, finance. And so when an economic shock comes along, they just don't have the resilience that's necessary. I compare that with Germany, has still maintained a very strong manufacturing base. And I don't know, last time I looked, it was in excess of a third of GDP was still in manufacturing. Very heavily export-oriented, but high-end manufacturing. And so there was a different course of action taken in Europe. Now, I think what's happened with the State of the Union address, just in January, is that President Obama once again arguing the case for the central role of innovation in the economic recovery of the United States. You think about the unemployment levels, you think about the level of deindustrialisation that's occurred, you think about the economic distress that's been created. Then I see the legacy of that sort of free market economics approach is now being demonstrated. He's going the other way around it. Now, for us, that's not an unbridled sense of opportunity, because what the hidden message there is that the United States wants to ensure that their R&D activities in particular are done at home, i.e. in the United States. And for many of our firms, that may well pose, in our international firms, might start to raise some questions. So we're going to have to lift our efforts. So when I talk about raising the standards here, going up the value chain, we simply don't have the luxury of saying we're going to beat China. It's not really an option. But what I do say is we've got to recognise that the Chinese are doubling their R&D effort every 7 years. We're not. We have a very high standard of living in this country, so we ought to have. But the political system also has to respond by saying we want to keep it. And the only way we'll keep it, in my opinion, is if we strive for excellence. We can't say to the Americans, the Chinese, or anyone else for that matter, no, we have to engage. So the sort of notion around a closed economy is just not open to us. That's the basis on which I say strive for excellence, aim for the top, don't think that you can survive on the bottom.
Thank you. Another question? We've got a microphone.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Sanjay Chawla from the University of Sydney. First of all, I'd like to thank you and the ARC for conducting the ERA exercise. I think it was very meticulously executed. You mentioned about, in the 08 code, 91% of the unit of evaluations got a rating of 3 or above. And the average rating was 3.4. But that data also shows that category 3 income, which is industry income, was quite low in the ICT area. So I think and you did mention the example of IBM. I think one way to increase sort of industry research income in the ICT area is to use the power of the purse of the federal government. There are big IT customers to lean on companies like IBM and Microsoft and Google to have more than just a marketing or a sales office in the country and have more research and development here.
Well, we would never use terms like lean on. We'd like to think we're a little bit more subtle than that. Firstly, let me deal with ERA. I'm very, very pleased with the way it's gone. It's demonstrated our strengths, and you're quite right, our weaknesses. Now, a lot of people don't want to talk about the weaknesses, but I have to. I have to be able to know where we're going. that will provide important information for you as a researcher about where your colleagues are, about the university administration will have very important information about what the state of play is within their institution, provide important information for students, provide incredibly important information for companies. Now, what we're trying to do is to provide the incentives to lift the level of investment by the private sector, whether it's be through Enterprise Connect and Researchers in Business. We're trying to lift the level of management skills in the individual firms, but also improve the links between the academy and the enterprise. So Researchers in Business is one opportunity. I've just announced a new industrial PhD program, because I think in general terms, by international standards, our performance in terms of PhD engagement is not strong enough. The R&D tax credit should open up new opportunities. Now, the nature of public policy is that you can't tell people, by and large, what to do. You can provide the framework where they make sensible decisions. That's the approach that I think is worthwhile. And I say that to the universities as well, because you're not immune from public discussion about considerable sums of public money that underwrite what you do. We can't say to you, don't do this or do this. We do say to you, it makes a bit of sense if you do this or do that. That also puts responsibility back on the university. And I would expect each and every one of you that actually engaged in the university to now have a higher level of interest in persuading your university to make the right decisions about where investments go as well.
Thank you, Minister. We might just take one last question, and then we have to move on. I think it's been very valuable. The question's down the front here.
Thanks. Shlomo Geva from QUT. In reading the ERA report for the 08 codes, I found it interesting that, excuse me, as percentage of the total output for Australia, it came at 7%. The funding, competitive funding, category 1, was only 2%. Will you use this outcome to change the spread of funding?
Well, in general terms, the answer is yes. In general terms. Now, some will say, oh, ERA doesn't tell us anything, we didn't know. That's not right. That's just not right. There's lots of stuff that we didn't know. I didn't know how bad applied business research was in this country. I mean, I had a suspicion. You know, I'm usually the victim of it. But I'm saying we didn't know. We didn't know. I didn't know how poor we were in areas of nuclear research. I think there are quite important bits of information in there that we just did not know. Yes, we did know where the centres of research were, but we only worked on the basis of presumption. We now have empirical data to back up our claims about strengths in those particular fields. What I want to do with ERA is talk to the university systems about what it means for them. It will affect funding, and we'll do it in a phased way and in a consultative way. I want to apply ERA to the research training scheme, for instance. I've mentioned already that I think the PhD program is something that really needs a bit of attention, and it hasn't been looked at for a while. So you've got to ask yourself, do we match the offers of PhD places with centres of real strength, or do we just offer tickets? Well, I'm not much interested in the second category. I've said before, we can't fund second-rate research. That's not my intention. But we may need to look at some sort of structural changes that occur within the system so that we have access for people, particularly in remote areas, in regional areas, and find new ways of ensuring that people are able to get a quality qualification, open up new areas of research that we need, as well as ensure that those that we do well at stay at internationally competitive levels.
Thank you. I think I'd like the audience to join me to thank the Minister. I think Australia is actually very fortunate to have a Minister who's so passionate, committed and engaged in supporting innovation, industry, science and research. Thank you again, Minister.